Hi, welcome to Simple Shifts Conversations in Food, Life, Weight, and Mindset. I'm Martha McKinnon, and this is my partner and brother, Peter Morrison. Welcome, welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. So I'm excited. Today we're going to continue our conversations around mindless eating, which is a book by Brian Wansink that I read. It's hard to imagine now, but I read it 10 years ago and it changed my life. And it just caused me to have some insights that helped me to see food and relationship with food in a whole new way that was so beneficial to me because I got to see and read that my struggles with food and weight were not specific to me. They're sort of more generalized. It's part of the human condition to have some of these challenges, and it was just so helpful for me. And after that, a few years later, I guess I did one summer a revisit where we ran a mindless eating challenge on simple nourished living. And we did I guess it was sort of like a book club, a virtual book club, where over the series of several weeks, we just read two chapters at a time and then shared our experiences and notes. And it helped a lot of people. And so I'm excited to be revisiting that because while I gained a lot, as I reread the book and look at the notes, there were certain details that I had forgotten that it's been fun to refresh in my mind. So we're going to pick up with that conversation. We're moving into chapters 3 and 4. But before we do that, I always love to check in and say, what's new and good? What's going really well in your world? What are you happy about?
It's, well, it's not my health.
It's not your health. You got a little froggy in your throat there. How you
Little
feeling? Little
congestion, so I
congestion.
apologize in advance, but I'm not contagious. Not that it matters. We're
Not
not
that it
together,
matters
but
over the online
internet. Yeah.
internet.
But I hopefully won't have any coughing or sneezing attacks. Things are just generally going well, and I'm really happy to say that this is our 14th episode, our
Which is pretty
14th
shocking.
podcast.
Yeah, we're sticking. We're showing it. We're showing that we're sticking with it, even though it's new. Whenever you're doing something new, it's uncomfortable, right? Until
It's
you get comfortable.
challenging.
It's
Hmm.
challenging. Yeah, you're putting yourself out there in a new and different way, and it does have a lot of parallels to the whole weight loss journey, right? Figuring
Hmm.
that out. For me anyway, it does. As I look back on that journey. Anytime you're learning something new, anytime you're putting yourself out there in a new way, it's important to just give yourself a lot of latitude and keep trying and not be hard on yourself. So all of these things that I keep reminding myself and sharing in the emails related to losing weight, eating better, managing your weight, it's the same whenever you're taking on anything new. Same with my Spanish. Oh
Right.
my gosh, trying to learn Spanish, same challenge. You know, if I was, it can be so uncomfortable to try to speak Spanish to Spanish speakers when they just look at you like, what are you saying? You know? And I think just got to stick with it. So yeah, good for us. We're doing it.
Right. And I'd say if one thing isn't working for you, pivot, make a small shift, make a small adjustment, and
And keep
you know
trying, right? Just try
keep
different,
trying.
yeah, you just got to, yeah. I mean, because it is insanity to keep doing the same thing without any changes, right? And expect different
Right.
results.
Right.
But at the same time, when you're learning something new, there's going to be a period where it's, uncomfortable as you're learning a skill until you develop enough ability where it gets a little easier. So yeah, you got to sort of know yourself, of course, and keep making adjustments to make it easier, for sure.
Great.
All right, so
So
mindless eating, and I
chapters.
will be looking down because I've tried to make a few notes here. So we're moving into chapters review of chapters 3 and 4, and a lot of the information in this book you did mention is it does get to be repetitive because there are a lot of studies that maybe were done in slightly different ways that demonstrated kind of the same underlying result. So it really, but
Hmm.
it does sort of, I think, um, just focus on some of the like overarching principles that can be really helpful for us to just sort of hammer into our own brains. The reality that when we see, like we really were designed for the seafood diet, the SEE, we weren't designed for the seafood diet because the more we see, the more we think about food, the more we see food, smell food, the more we eat. It just really is basic and simple as that. And again, that makes sense for survival, right, from an evolution standpoint. But as we live now in a world where food is too plentiful for those of us who struggle with managing our weight, just realizing the fact that the more we see food, the more we're going to eat. It could almost let us, like for me, in some ways, that makes me feel a little better because it gives me a sense of I can manage it. If I understand that and really get it in my brain, then there are a lot of things I can do to take charge so that I don't see food as much. And it's magical when you start to make those environmental shifts and changes. So there was a lot of talk around all of those influences in our kitchen, in eating out in restaurants that can really play havoc with our waistline that we probably want to explore. Did anything stand out in your memory, Peter, as you were, or really, you want to
Well,
share about
a
what you,
lot, and I took some notes, and one thing I do struggle with, and I think everybody probably struggles with something similar their first time through, is that you don't think you're susceptible to certain things. And I and I haven't been studied or tested in any way, but when I think about, and I know they've done studies and they've redone them after they've already explained to really um, smart like business students or whoever, and it didn't matter. They still um, were affected or impacted by it. So I'm struggling with that a little with myself, thinking, so I have to somehow find a way to pay more attention to see.
well, and I think one thing that I picked up and I noticed from reread again, because I think and I didn't fully reread the whole book, but I, every time you read a book, I feel like you pick up things that you didn't pick up the first time. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I picked up this time that I really hadn't focused on in the last time, he did mention the whole French women don't get fat phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Remember?
Mm-hmm.
So he said that, and I love that book. That's another book that really helped me immensely. I love that approach. I love, there was a time when I had read that book and I really practiced, you know, being a French lady, which I thought was very, very helpful. And so they did talk about that and the fact that in the French culture, they're much more attuned with their own internal signals, and so if you ask a Parisian, and they did a study where they did a questionnaire of Parisians and Chicagoans, and just for a comparison, and the basic questions were around like, how do you know, when to stop eating? And most
Mm-hmm.
Parisians are going to say, when I'm no longer hungry. There's that internal sense they eat when they're hungry. They're in tune with their internal signals. And for most Chicagoans, it was some type of external indicator, like the external indicator, but well, when my glass was empty, when my plate was empty, when the TV show was over, when all the people I was, were eating with were done, you know, those kinds of external signals. And I guess at the end of the day, I think that that's what helps protect, some of these other cultures against what we've maybe experienced here in America, is the fact that they have um, more sort of rules and guidelines, and they're more internally directed, which helps them overcome some of these influences that seem to affect us um, in a bigger way. But he also has done enough experimentation with people of a normal weight, slender people, people overweight and obese, to say that some of these influences will happen, regardless of, it's not always just because, well, you know, it's not that only overweight people eat more in the presence of more variety. It's all people will do that. So that was something that I really I think that that's another thing that because I'm spending a little time sort of reflecting now as I revisit this book, because it has been 15 years since I first read the book, really started, took it to heart. And it's been 15 years since I've been at or below goal. So, and that to me, back when I was in the struggle, it seems like a miracle now. If you had told me back then there'll be a day where food just doesn't have the same power over you that it once did, I wouldn't have probably believed it. And so the same thing that you're saying in this book, there's some things that are presented that seem so unbelievable
Mm.
that even though the science, um, per, per, um, you know, validates it, you sort of question it. And sometimes it was helpful because in the study they talk about different studies with animals, like with rats and things, and some of these same behaviors hold true with rats, like the convenience factor. Do you remember this study where they said they set up, rats basically with food. They had to get through a maze or to get to the food. And so when they were hungry, they would go do it and eat and then come back. But then in the situation where they would add like the scent of a hawk, so they added this threat, this predator, and it changed their behavior. Going to eat the food was no longer as
Mm-hmm.
convenient. It was more risky, and it changed the way the rats fed, right? They rushed over, they did what they needed to do, and they got back to safety. And it's not just a human phenomenon. Some of this is carried forth in animal studies too.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting too, the fact that we eat more from larger packages.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
just thought about that because because I'm thinking, well, what does the package size have to do with it? And apparently, further on, larger packages, like larger portions, suggest that becomes the new norm for the consumption.
Right.
You know,
And
if you're eating,
yeah. And so that's another whole theory about why, because there's been a lot of study, right, to say what's happened in our culture over the past, 40, 50 years where this problem with overweight, obesity, with so many more people suffering from it. Like, it's not like our biology has changed that much over that time, right? It has to be something in the environment that has shifted. And you can look at a lot of things in our environment, in our culture, that are different now that make food more plentiful and more easy, right? So we know from reading this book that more convenient a food is, the easier the
Mm-hmm.
food is to get, the more we're going to eat. And so do you remember the experiment with the secretaries with the candy dish?
clear candy dishes versus first there
Right.
was the clear dish and then the colored like the non-see-through dish
Opaque.
and then the second follow-up was the placement of the dish, how
Right.
easy it was to access.
Right. So they did this study with secretaries and the placement of a candy dish to measure like how much candy they would eat. And if the candy was on the desk within arm's reach, as you would expect, that it resulted in the most candy being consumed. If the candy dish was placed in a drawer, you know, out of sight, then resulted in less candy being eaten. And then if they moved the candy dish, right, where you had to actually get up to get the candy, that resulted in even less being eaten. And again, they do this experiment with many people in many different situations just to confirm that what they're finding is true. And so by knowing these things, that's what I really loved about this book. By knowing these things and understanding these things, you can start to make changes. And even if you don't believe it totally, it's worth the experiment because these are easy shifts, right? In my mind.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, it's a heck of a lot easier to rearrange my kitchen, to buy smaller packages, or if from an economic standpoint, to buy the bigger package but like hide the excess, put a small amount in a Tupperware container, or pre portion things out into little Ziplocs. It's a heck of a lot easier in my mind, and I guess that's what I loved about this, than trying to manage yourself or manage your willpower um, without taking these steps. And so he talked a lot about the kitchen and what's the foods that are showing in your kitchen and just how much influence they can have on your weight. They went in and looked, and basically they correlated that having like boxes of cereal in view in a kitchen correlated to a person weighing 20 pounds more than a person who doesn't have cereal readily available. So it's tucked away in a pantry somewhere. And some of the other examples were soda. I think soda in view. If you walk into a kitchen and you see the soda, and he said it didn't matter, which was I thought was interesting, whether or not it was diet soda or regular soda correlated to 25 pounds more than a kitchen where it wasn't on display in the kitchen. And I think, and then was the other one was fruit. Like if you have fruit, vegetables on display, then that equated to weighing 13 pounds less than somebody who didn't have the fruit and or veg just readily available in the kitchen. So in my mind, it was just really easy to say, I'm cleaning up my kitchen, I'm cleaning up my pantry. If that can result in making life easier and for me to get to my goal and stay there in a way that's easy, that was just like a no-brainer. And I've lived that out pretty much. And I noticed like if you start to get sloppy, if you start to leave things out, it does change your behavior. I just took a lot of these suggestions to heart, and the tempting leftovers I started putting in um with foil over them or in some type of opaque container. And it's true, you open the fridge, you don't see it, you know and suddenly you've forgotten to eat it, which was interesting. Yeah, so these things
Oh,
really helped me a lot, the whole realizing that the more we see it, the more we're going to eat, the more
what I
variety.
also
Hmm?
Yeah, what I also found, I want to get back to the variety, but what I
Yeah.
also found interesting was the horizontal vertical illusion test,
Yeah.
where he talked about the tall, skinny glasses versus the shorter, fatter
Right.
glasses. And I actually measured because I'm like that illusion. It looked those lines, and I'll put it up on the screen
Yeah.
in the final version of this.
Yeah.
But I'm like, those aren't the same
Right.
size, and sure enough,
They
they're the
were.
same size.
Yeah. So the power. So again, this whole concept of shrinking your dishes, using taller, thinner glasses versus
Yes.
squattier, what would you short and squatty
Shorter.
glasses.
Hmm.
And it was interesting because they did experiments with, so if you're wanting to drink less, if it's something that's quite caloric, then you're much better off putting the beverage in a tall, thin glass because you're going to drink less. And they did experiments trying to get bartenders, right, to be able to do a free pour of a shot
Hmm.
into a tall, thin glass versus, and these are really experienced, and they missed the mark, right, in that shorter, squatter
The short
glass.
glass.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so you're right. So it sounds like it can't be true. But it is, and that's part of the problem, right? We discount it and we say it can't be that simple. And I guess I'm glad that I was just open enough to say, what if it is that simple? And let's just go
Hmm.
for it. And I found it, like I said, it was just life-changing for me. So shrinking your dishes is really powerful. And I've done that. Um, if you've got dishes that can't, I mean, there's some dishes now that can barely fit in the dishwasher. They've got to be like 12 inches in diameter. And you're gonna eat more. I mean, just because if you put a normal portion on a dish that big, it's gonna look skimpy and scanty. So we do eat with our eyes.
So, do you think we have larger dishes because food manufacturers make such large portions, or do you think food makers make larger portions because our plates are so much larger?
I don't, I think I don't know what came first, but I know all of it plays together to influence our eating patterns and
Hmm.
can start to
Hmm.
explain part of why we weigh so much more as a society than we did, 40 or 50 years ago. I think it's all having an influence. The size of restaurant portions, right? This shopping at these big um what do you call them? The big box stores, right? Where you're buying huge quantities of product now that you're bringing into your home. You need a bigger pantry to store all of these products. I read a great, interesting book too on the whole portion, the portion aspect of all of this and how it can really explain a lot of the um, a lot of the weight gain that we've experienced as a society. So, yeah.
So I want to touch on quickly on the variety.
Hmm.
Was that what was it
Yep.
variety or
Yeah. So they've done a lot of studies that show the more choice that you have, the more you're going to eat. And that kind of just plays out, we all have that experience at the buffet, right? When you really load up and you end up eating because there's so many different tastes and so many different things that you want to eat that you end up eating more than you typically would if you just ordered off a menu. And they did studies around, and it's even goes beyond that, right? To things that seem as innocuous as the color of M&Ms, and the fact that they did experiments to say, well, if you had, seven different color and we all know that M&Ms don't taste different, right? Because of the color. But if you were eating M&Ms that came in a variety of like 12 different colors versus seven, people ended up eating significantly more just because of that color difference.
part of the buffet? Wasn't that though? Wasn't the recommendation to only put one or two things on your plate at a
Yeah.
time?
Yeah. And that's something that, again, that I had sort of forgotten and that I want to revisit because I tend to be taking part in more potlucks and things lately. And so, yeah, so one of the suggestions for trying to manage that overexposure to so many different tastes and so many different flavors is to limit your choices and only put two different foods, on your plate at a time and then go sit down and enjoy them. And again, then be checking in to say, have I had enough before you go back? Don't be loading up your plate with, 20 different items because all of those tastes are going to result in you eating more. So,
Hmm. So if you're gonna have a bowl of ice cream, have a scoop with one flavor, pick your favorite, but
right.
don't if
Right,
you
because
have
they did
three.
studies even with
Mhm.
yogurt, right? If you have like one flavor of yogurt in your dish versus three, you're going to eat more because it's like your taste buds get tired, right? And if you're not, and again, if you're not really staying in touch with your hunger, I mean, I think that staying in touch with your hunger can override a lot of this. If we could really get back to that point where and I'm spending quite a bit of time revisiting that right now, where I feel like hunger directed eating would be the ultimate best case solution, right? Where you're staying tapped in and tuned into yourself so that even maybe on occasion there may be a Thanksgiving where you're going to eat more than you typically would, but for the most part, if you're constantly checking in to say have I had enough instead of like is the dish empty, it can be real helpful. Did you have any other thoughts around so making the tempting foods inconvenient, some
Mhm.
sometimes there are certain foods maybe you don't even bring into your home if you feel like they call to you at all hours of the day and night. That's the
Do you have
suggestion.
any foods like that?
I do, and it's so funny. I used to had a real problem with Cheez-Its. And I would say like Ben and Jerry's ice cream probably. But so the first time that I ever opened the freezer, to discover like freezer burned ice cream, I thought life is different. And Cheez-Its now
Mm.
um, I had to stop bringing them into the house because once I got into them, I just didn't seem to have any sense of control. But now I can really take them or leave them. They just don't have the same pull that they once did. How about you? No.
We pretty much keep food in the pantry or in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
There's not a lot out on the counter, and we have I there Trader Joe's has like mini dark chocolate peanut butter cups.
Hmm.
And we used to go through, I don't know, it's like a 16-ounce container, um, probably 20 or so
Hmm.
candies in each container. And we used to go through them much more. And now I don't even know the last time we bought like a new container. And it's in the refrigerator. We kind of like our chocolate kind of chilled. And
Yeah.
it's kind of, I don't know if it's intentional or not. It just sort of ended up not within plain sight when you open the refrigerator. It's kind of tucked away, and so I know it's there, but
Hmm.
I don't see it. And
Well,
Um,
I've been doing a lot of reading too recently around the whole concept that it's actually the diet, like our dieting and our deprivation that's sort of feeding the frenzy. There's been a lot written around that I think we'll explore in later podcasts. And so if you're living the life, which I think you are, where you're not depriving yourself, you're not on a diet, it's available. It's much less enticing. I think what happens is when
mm,
you're in that
mm,
you're in that diet mindset where suddenly you say you can't have it, that makes it so much more. There's something that happens in our brain, I think, that just it makes us crazed. And there's a lot of science. I mean, there's some very, very interesting studies that even date back to studies that were done after World War II to substantiate this. The fact that, rationing people, depriving them, limiting their calories actually feeds, makes the problem so much worse. And so I think what you're
mm.
describing is the fact that you can have it if you want it, but you realize that once once that diet mindset goes away and it's not off limits, it's much less attractive. And so in some ways I think that that's another aspect that we have to look at is what's the story we're telling ourselves and what's our state of mind. And if our state of mind is I have to eat this because I'm starting my diet tomorrow, right? And I'm not going to ever have it again, then that creates this much more urgent these urges and cravings that are much stronger. And I think that that's part of what I'm experiencing now, all these years later, when you sort of step away from and off the diet sort of mindset where you say anything, I can have anything I want, you know,
Mhm.
and I'm not on a diet. I'm just going to develop a lifestyle that works for me. And you slowly work your way off that whole diet, off limits thinking. I
Mhm.
think that that can be very, very powerful as well in this.
Yeah, that makes me think we went out for pizza recently for lunch,
Mm-hmm.
nothing crazy, and had a salad first, which I like salad and pizza. I like
Mm-hmm.
them together. And I think I had a piece. I actually had a piece, one and a half pieces,
Yeah.
because we split a second one, and I was perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I didn't. Where back in the day, I could eat, take pizza home. It's like, no, why would you do that when you could have four pieces there in the restaurant? And
Yeah. And part of it plays into another thing that came up in in this book was the concept of like scripts, and the fact that, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself for the next chapters 5 and 6, I get confused, but the fact that we've got these deeply ingrained habits, you know,
mm,
um, from childhood, from that can continue to play out in our lives. And so you have to sort of revisit some of those stories and scripts and habits to say how, for example, like one really powerful script is I think that we were told as children you must clean out your plate, right?
mhm,
You absolutely must. And that it becomes so deeply ingrained that you don't even question it, even when it's working against you. Or, why would I take this pizza home because it's not going to taste as good, so I'm going to overeat because that's what
right.
you're just in the, if you grow up in a family where you eat to the point where you're uncomfortable, and that becomes your norm. And then suddenly you lose touch almost with your natural hunger, and satisfaction signals because you've overridden them in so many ways, both through dieting and deprivation and through overeating. So all of this sometimes has to just be recalibrated to just recheck
Hmm.
in with your new reality. What is it you're trying to accomplish at this age and stage of your life? And I know through the years there's been a lot around the people really having a problem with the throwing food away, because it's been so deeply ingrained from childhood that that was just a terrible thing to do. And now you have to just ask yourself, well, what's helpful for me at this age and stage of my life? If I'm struggling with my health, and I've got, I'm diabetic and I'm overweight and I have all these health problems, what's the bigger harm? Throwing food away or, um, or not,
Or maybe eat just eating less, not necessarily cleaning your plate, but maybe find a way if it's something that can be repurposed as
Absolutely.
leftovers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So not yeah, you can find a way to waste less while eating
Right,
less, for sure. Yeah.
right. And he did mention, I know this is getting a little bit long, but he did mention that simply thinking of food can make you hungry. And that
right?
just,
Right? Thinking
I guess
about
I
it. Hmm.
struggle with that one too, because you think hunger is a physical um, condition, not a mental condition.
But it's all so quick, um, intricately intertwined, right?
Mm,
Because everything begins as a thought when you really sort of think about it. So you think about food and it can set off that kind of Pavlov reaction when you start salivating. You think about it, even thinking, smelling, the Cinnabon effect, where you're at the mall and suddenly you smell, you watch the Food Network and somebody's making this wonderful food, and now suddenly it's on your mind. And all of this it can start a physiologic reaction in your body. Just thinking about it and starting that salivation can cause your hormones, right? Your insulin levels to start to shift and real hunger to result from a thought. So that's interesting to think about too. And so you have to think about, am I overthinking about food again, going back to the whole deprivation mindset? Am I overthinking about food now because I've made it off limits, and I've created a taboo around it, and now I'm even making it more powerful with the thinking. So it's like a
mm,
vicious cycle that's
mm.
not easily unwound. You just got to take it step by step, sort of action by action, awareness by awareness.
Well, great. This was awesome. Looking forward to the next two chapters, which will
Yeah.
be coming up in our next episode.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we'll be back in our next episode where we'll take a closer look at chapters 5 and 6 of the book Mindless Eating.
And if you like this video, please subscribe, or if you have anyone who you think might benefit from it, please share it with them. And if you have any comments on the video or on the book, if you happen to be reading along with us, please leave them below.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back soon.
Have a good one.